So this is where we left off. This is, please watch this little video. It's not very long. You can find it on Canvas under Chapter 14. And it's about the origin and adaptive radiation of birds. Adaptive radiation, we're going to cover that in a bit, but it means the quick speciation of many different species in a short period of time. And there are a number of reasons that might happen. But we're talking about birds and dinosaurs now. Archaeopteryx, most of you have probably heard of it. It's considered the first bird, but whether it's actually a bird or an avian avian-like bird-like dinosaur is still an argument as far as the word actually goes. But we talked about this a little bit, transitional traits, and Archaeopteryx is a classic transitional taxa. So it could fly. It had a mixture of ancestral traits that it shared with many theropod dinosaurs. And then it also had newly derived traits under the under selection and adaptation because it could definitely fly. And to be able to fly, there's a number of things that have to be overcome. First of all, it's expensive to fly, and anything that is heavy makes flying even more difficult. So dinosaurs, theropod dinosaurs, and maybe even others, many of them had feathers, especially body feathers, and also insulation like downy feathers as well. And those feathers had pigments, and it looks like they were used for the same thing that modern birds use them for as well, besides flying, and that is for display for sexual selection. Unlike modern birds, it had a long bony tail. We actually look at modern birds. This is a duck. We notice that the tail has been reduced to what's called a pygostyle. And so all that, first of all, having a tail probably makes it more difficult to fly, though it might have helped the bird when it was on the ground. So it reduced weight. And then it also had teeth. Okay, instead of a bill, no teeth. Just so you know, there are actually birds nowadays that do have small teeth, but they're not the same kind of teeth that we have or that our original reptiles had. And I've seen them. There's a bird called a motmot in Panama, where I saw that actually had little teeth-like things along its beak. It also, Archaeopteryx also had 3 fingers at the end of its wing that it could use to grab onto things. Unlike the fused fingers that are now found in the bird's wing. Okay. Difference in ribs. Okay. Let's see. And then, but it did have wings with flight feathers. Now, flight feathers are a little different than normal feathers. They're asymmetrical. So I'll give you an example. Okay. Also, furcula or wishbone. Fully reversible first toe, like modern birds. And of course it flew, so it had a complete mixture of all different kinds of things. And like I said, it's still not sure whether it was the first bird. It's been considered that for a long time, but obviously it's not quite like birds of today, which have a lot of newly derived features that reduce weight, among other things. Okay. Most body feathers are symmetrical. So this is the wing vein, the shaft right down the middle. Okay, but asymmetric flight feathers means that one side is wider than the other, and it actually creates lift. So if we look at an evolutionary tree, or two of them, so the traditional tree is this one, and it shows that the root is theropod dinosaurs like T-Rex and raptors and things like that. And then along one group led to these meat-eating dinosaurs called Deinonychus, including Troodontids, which are bird-like dinosaurs, and Dromaeosaurs. And then it shows Archaeopteryx. All modern birds. But there's some evidence actually that, and this is just one hypothetical tree, where it shows similar, obviously it's still theropod dinosaurs, right? And then it leads to the dromaeosaurs, including Troodontids and dromaeosaurs, and then a sister group, which is Archaeopteryx, these flying dromaeosaurs. Okay, and then birds, modern birds, are sister to this whole lineage on this other side. Okay, and it's mainly because there are a lot of other features that have been looked at in terms of fossils and stuff, in terms of where you might place Archaeopteryx. And then even the third tree, again, Dromaeosaurids, another clade, Troodontids, another clade, Arionyx, kind of an early bird. You can actually see what it looks like. Not a very good picture. It actually shows some evidence of pigments in the feathers. And then finally, down to here, Archaeopteryx. Another lineage of birds that has gone extinct. And then finally, early birds. And here's our modern modern bird, it's a roadrunner. It's closely related to cuckoos and things like that. Okay. So birds, there's lots of evidence that birds, well, first of all, they were dinosaurs, and they were particularly from a lineage of theropod dinosaurs, and then further specifics in terms of the lineage. And then, since we're going on the history of life, we can talk a little bit about mammals. These are the three main groups of mammals. Eutherians, like ourselves, offspring are nourished inside the mother's body through the placenta, and the offspring are born relatively well-developed state, but still require usually a fair amount of parental care. There's the marsupials. They have kind of a simple placenta, but the offspring are developed much less well-developed. They actually have to crawl out of the birth canal and then into a pouch. Almost all marsupials have a pouch, not all of them though do. And the offspring then develop, they attach to a nipple, they drink milk, and they then develop further until they're ready to get around on their own. And then finally, monotremes. And no placenta. They come from eggs. Okay, and they hatch. They still do have hair coloring. This is the platypus. And they still produce milk, like the whole clade. So this whole clade has fur and produces milk. Now, there's been other lineages of mammals that have died out, that have gone completely extinct. In fact, one of the most successful groups of mammals that had the longest living examples on Earth, about 160 million years from the Jurassic all the way into to about 30 million years ago, were called multi-tuberculates. But they died out after they were being outcompeted by rodents, it looks like, and other placental mammals. And they died at about 30 million years ago. Okay, so we're going to go now on to human evolution and apes. So apes are hominids, and all apes don't have a tail. Okay. Humans are members of the ape family. A lot of ape characteristics, including use of tools, capacity for symbolic language, performance of deliberate acts of deception, abstract thinking. A lot of apes actually show this. So, now, hominids, those are the apes. Hominins are the distinct branch of apes that led to modern humans. And at the moment, there's only one, of course, species of hominin in existence, and that's us, Homo sapiens. But there have been many, many, many different species since the split between the ancestors of chimpanzees and hominins 6 or 7 million years ago. Okay, so and one of the things is we've got bipedal walking, upright on two legs, more upright posture, loss of opposable toes for walking instead of being in trees, arched foot, different kinds of tooth enamel. So primates. So this is a kind of um, an evolutionary tree of monkeys, lemurs, monkeys, and apes. So about 65 million years ago, after the asteroid struck, a number of millions of years after that, the first primates fossils show up, and they are a branch called lemurs, lorises, and others. They're called prosimians. There's the only ones of those available that are still around are in Madagascar, lemurs and bush babies in Africa and things like that. And then about 45 million years ago, there was the what we call modern monkeys, and but they didn't start out in the New World. They actually started out in the probably in Asia at that time. And then the New World monkeys, there's a big question about when they actually, it looks like they colonized South America at a certain point. So, but they all have tails. And then finally, about 16 million years ago, we finally get what are the apes. And the apes include orangutans, also another group called gibbons. They're called the lesser apes. Again, no tail. Gorillas, chimpanzees, number of different species of each. And then finally, the human lineage, which includes a whole bunch of extinct species, including up until about 25,000 years ago or 30,000 years ago on Neanderthals. Okay. So this is going over something we already went over. As you know, we have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. One of each pair is from dad and the other is from mom, so we have a total of 46. Okay. All the other great apes have 24 chromosomes, 48 total. And of course, so what happened? Well, you don't lose a chromosome just like that, or a pair of chromosomes like that. There are too many genes on one chromosome, thousands of genes, that if you had some kind of mutation like that. But again, it looks like there was actually a fusion of two ape chromosomes. Apes 12 and 13 formed human chromosome 2, which is the longest chromosome that we have, that has almost identical sequence similarity to a lot of genes on between chromosome 2 and chromosome 13. There's vestigial centromeres and telomeres on the chromosome to show that fusion actually happens. So this is how we know that we're more closely related to great apes than to anything else. And in fact, we're about 98.5% similar to chimpanzee. So there's a lot of differences. First of all, the spinal cord for humans enters the cranium right from below in the center of the skull, whereas the spinal cord from a chimpanzee enters from the rear of the skull, and the whole face and everything is pulled forward. The pelvis is quite different. Pelvis for humans allows upright posture, and all the other bipedal humans that came before us. A lot of great apes, like the chimpanzee and the gorilla have a foot with an opposable toe, but we don't. Okay, so these animals spend a lot more time in trees and climbing in trees, where such a thing would be most useful. So take a look at primate evolution. It is chapter 17. It says animations, and watch that little video. It goes through a little bit on, give you an idea of what's going on with primate evolution. As far as this shows skin color. It turns out skin color is convergent evolution. Dark and light skin have actually evolved multiple times independently, depending on where those groups of humans were living. If they lived in the tropics, they usually always had darker skin for protection, and also you need lighter skin for vitamin D, making vitamin D, and so you can do in the temperate regions and northern regions and far southern regions where there's less direct UV light. So as I said, it's an example of convergent evolution. Convergence is where you have similar traits that are not inherited from a common ancestor, but are evolved independently because of similar environments. And in this case, it's the environment of the sun and how much UV light is striking. Okay, so in terms of human evolution, this is a kind of quick look. So here we are, chimps and bonobos, our two closest relatives. And then we don't know when. Oh, this is the actual ancestor to all of them. But then we have the first example of perhaps bipedal adaptations. Not necessarily that they're not using the trees anymore, but less so, and perhaps spending more time on the ground. And we've got some fossils like that, some very ancient ones from about 4.5 million years ago, including Ardipithecus, and then some other changes, enlarged jaws and cheeks, and we have what are called Australopithecus, that were definitely like Lucy. They stood upright. They had very small brains, about the same size as chimpanzees. Okay. Same thing with our Africanus. There were some other lineages like Paranthropus that had really, really large teeth and jaws, and probably for eating vegetation and things like that. Okay, but then the first real thing where we start seeing, first of all, a larger brain and perhaps stone tool use. There's questions, though, about that. There are still some questions about whether there were even tool use from Australopithecines as well. Now, we know, actually, that, or stone tool use. We know that chimpanzees use tools. They strip twigs and use them for getting termites, and they even make spears for hunting. little tiny, these small bush babies, which are a kind of prosimian primate. But certainly by Homo habilis about 2 million years ago, started to see larger brain size, fingers with precision grips or fingers, the fossils were changing, certainly stone tools, the use of fire. Okay, and then finally we get to Homo erectus. From about 2 million, 1.9 million years ago, and Homo erectus spread all over the planet. First found in Africa, but then found in East Asia, like Java man and things like that. Smaller jaws, longer legs, arched feet for running, much larger brains, right? Homo neanderthalensis and heidelbergensis, complex stone tools, hunting tools, about the same brain size as modern humans, in some cases even bigger. Small face, small brow, complex language, symbolic art, things like that. It looks like Neanderthals had many of those things, as well as heidelbergensis, which might have been an ancestor of both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Okay, so here's Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis from, let's see, when was this? Oh, it was found in 1978. 3.9 million years. She was not very tall, about 1.25 meters tall. Okay, so 3 feet, maybe 4 feet tall at the most. Covered in hair, probably, but bipedal, certainly. Had an arch in the feet. The pelvis and leg bones resembled those of modern men. And as far as for walking, females were smaller, sexual dimorphism. And these are some actual footprints that were probably from her. She still had an opposable big toe, indicating that she might have spent a fair amount of time climbing trees as well. So she could definitely walk upright and walk well, but probably not as well as we can, but was probably more adept in trees. So these are various groups of hominins. Paranthropus was this one with the big jaws and everything. Homo habilis, the first Homo species that we have. Actually, there's another one that has been found more recently called Homo nerita in South Africa. There's this very small hobbit human that was found in the last 10 years on Florensis in Indonesia, and it was alive for up to and it was very short, about 3 feet tall, but still had stone tools and hunted. And then in the back, this is Homo erectus. Okay, and then final Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens. In fact, there's another one called H. Denisovan that was discovered through DNA technology. Okay, so why was there increase in brain size? Well, we all like smart people, right? Doesn't mean we always have smart people. But anyway, brains are expensive. In fact, if you actually look at our brains and how much energy they use, our brains consume about 20% of all the food calorie energies that we make, and only actually account for about maybe 5 or 10% of our actual body weight. Okay, so brains are extremely expensive to run, and if they don't give you an advantage, there's no sense in having large brains and greater intelligence. Okay, so the question is, what started larger brains? Well, it might have been, first of all, that perhaps there were better food sources, and that allowed for more of that energy to go to actual cognitive development. And then over long periods of time, an increasing brain size and perhaps intelligence and abstract thinking led to increased tool and language use, and of course larger brains that we find now. But you could also say, why not the increased tool use? Because remember, there's some evidence that that some Australopithecines were actual tool users and things like that. Why not tool use and language caused the increase for selection and ability to reason and communicate and larger brain size? So you have to figure out, sometimes cause and effect can be confusing. So what does intelligence actually, what does it do for us besides being so much more expensive? Well, one thing is the cognitive hypothesis. Our species were hunter-gatherers and probably traveled large areas and had to remember where things were, including water sources and all that, and perhaps being able to navigate and have a kind of a map to know where you're going in your own head. Some people are much better at it than others, even nowadays. There are some people, they walk out the door and they don't know where they are. There are other people, you can drop them anywhere and they're going to find out where they are. So it turns out that there are a lot of animals that have incredible, what we call spatial ability and cognitive map sensibilities. For example, corvids are a type of bird that includes jays, ravens, crows. They are all very intelligent birds. Most corvids actually catch food items, then recover later. And some of them, like this pinyon jay, might actually cache thousands and thousands of seeds and remember exactly where they cached them. Something that no human around today could ever possibly do. So, truly astounding. Now, another idea is that perhaps having a big brain in terms of sexual selection, it might be, it's called the selection hypothesis. Intelligent is sexy, right? So here's Einstein. Einstein buff, a buff Einstein. Okay. And obviously very smart. Perhaps that was a reason for intelligence might have given, or bigger brains might have given more intelligence more adaptive value in terms of getting mates and things like that. And then finally, humans are social animals. And like these types of related to baboons in Ethiopia. And in a social environment, one of the strongest selective forces is social technique and being aware of who is who might be a rival, who might be an ally, who obviously is related to you, who you can trust, who you might want to mate with, all these kinds of things. And it's called the social brain or Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. In other words, the complexity of the social environment requires that you have a big brain size and lots of intelligence to be able to maneuver through society in a way that you are able to survive and reproduce successfully. Okay. So, up until about 15 years ago, the only DNA we had were from living things or recently dead things. And, of course, that's been great. But remember, fossils only tell you so much. And with DNA, you can get a much better idea of making evolutionary trees and things like that. Okay, so it turns out that there's this guy named Svante Pääbo. He's from Sweden. He lives in Germany now. And he was the one who kind of invented what's called paleogenetics. He first worked with Egyptian mummies. He's actually a molecular biologist and geneticist. He first worked with mummies and it was the first person to actually extract ancient DNA from mummies from 4,000 years ago. Okay? Extraordinary. And over that, since then, the whole technology has advanced incredibly, and we've actually recovered DNA from all kinds of ancient hominins, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, closely related, and there was, by the way, interbreeding between all three groups. Okay. And then, of course, this shows the common ancestor of all great apes had 48 chromosomes, or 24 homologous pairs. One group remained that way, and the other group that led to humans led to, there was a fusion and a loss of one pair of chromosomes that were fused together. So, Pääbo was the first to actually recover DNA not only from Egyptian mummies, but from Neanderthals and what are known as Denisovans, this other ancient hominin that lived about the same time as Neanderthals, and they're more closely related to Neanderthals than they are to modern humans. And he actually pieced together the first draft genome, complete genome of a Neanderthal, with the same sort of coverage as you would find with a modern human. And that told us a lot of stuff, first about the evolution and how much differences there are between Neanderthals and humans. Modern humans, not very much. We're about 99.8% similar in terms of our genome. And has given us insights now into, they've also gotten DNA, ancient DNA from other extinct animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, dire wolves, ancient horses from almost 7 or 800,000 years ago, so it's really amazing. Okay, so we're going to take a look at Neanderthals and modern humans. The first modern human that we have good fossil record with, well, actually, these are from Europeans, but they're modern humans in a sense, called Cro-Magnon man. Okay. This is a skeleton. Cro-Magnon, or modern humans. Cro-Magnons are fully anatomically modern humans from about 20 to 25,000 years ago, contemporaneous with Neanderthals perhaps. Taller than Neanderthals. Neanderthals were shorter but much more robust. They had thicker bones. If you notice, they had a closed rib cage. Modern humans don't have that. Open rib cage. And they were shorter. This Neanderthal here probably might have been about my size or a little bit shorter, but he probably weighed 280 pounds. Okay? I don't weigh 280 pounds. You're not going to see a 5-foot tall human weighing 280 pounds unless they're obese, but these guys were not obese. They were all muscle. Okay? And then modern humans showed some differences. Both had about the same size brains. Okay. So, who were the Neanderthals? First of all, they were one of two of our closest human relatives. Including also Denisovans. And Denisovans and Neanderthals were sister to each other. They probably split from the same common ancestor. Okay? Denisovans were found mostly in East Asia, Neanderthals mostly in West, but there was some overlap. They used to be thought of as hairy cavemen with big brains but no wits, but that's not true. They've shown everything from highly sophisticated stone tool use to the use of jewelry and things like that, and art and whatnot. So they Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived, and Denisovans lived contemporaneously up until perhaps 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. In other words, they definitely, well, we know they did because it turns out we have evidence that they interbred. Neanderthals went extinct. Denisovans went extinct, except for the DNA that are in us. Did Neanderthals disappear altogether? Or has some of them incorporated into humans? In other words, their DNA. Okay. So, Neanderthal 6. It turns out that Neanderthals and Denisovans and modern humans apparently had sex together. It probably wasn't along the lines of bringing candy for Valentine's Day. Probably more along the lines of coercive sex. We'll leave it at that. Okay. So, looking at mitochondrial DNA, these are human. We see the variation in mitochondrial DNA of modern humans living now. Then we have Neanderthals. that are another different group, okay, that are about 200 bases away from where the mean for modern humans is, for different modern human groups now living. And then Denisovan humans, which is even more. Now you might think that, oh, Denisovans and Neanderthals are further away from humans than Neanderthals are, but they're not. Neanderthals and Denisovans share our most recent common ancestor from probably 640,000 years ago or 700,000 years ago. Okay. The question is, why, with this mitochondrial DNA that we get from a mitochondria and is always passed from our mothers, not from our fathers, why Denisovans have more, or their mitochondria was so much different? Well, it looks like it was actually because of an interbreeding event with Neanderthals. After they split from Denisovans, they started interbreeding, and the human mitochondrial DNA actually replaced the original mitochondrial DNA that they shared with Denisovans. So that's what's looking at. Okay. So here's a Neanderthal. They don't look all that. But we don't know this. Of course, if you were a Neanderthal, maybe this is cute. Who knows? Most Neanderthals in Western Europe and the Middle East, but even in a cave in Siberia, they were all. That DNA. They discovered that this was not from a Neanderthal. This was from a completely unknown human, and there's been very little bones that have been recovered. Recently, a jawbone and a part of a skull was recovered from Tibet. That we don't know for sure that it was Denisovan, but it looks like a pretty good find. And the Denisovans, it looks like there might have been more different populations of them in East Asia. And they too interbred with modern humans. But these were modern humans from Eurasia, including the Middle East. And even a little bit in Africa, but not very much. Because remember, modern humans left Africa after, of course, the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans did. And so there's only, most of the interbreeding happened with Eurasian human populations of modern humans with Neanderthals or Denisovans. And in fact, one group of modern humans, those from Australia and Oceania, like New Guinea and some of those islands, they actually have up to 6% of their DNA is from Denisovans, whereas there's hardly any. Now, there are East Asians, like Chinese, that show some levels of interbreeding with Denisovans, and Tibetans especially. Okay. So these are different hypotheses about how modern humans originated. Okay. Now, at one time, most of the, as we'll see, the evidence pointed to an out-of-Africa hypothesis. Humans originated in Africa. So this is the spread of Homo erectus. This is before modern humans showed up. And then modern humans evolved, still in Africa, and then gave rise to different populations like Europeans, Asians, Australians, North Americans, the Americans from North and South America. Okay? So that was the dominant, but DNA has kind of screwed that up. Now, there was another hypothesis that, and this is actually a holdover from the early 20th century, where there was an African origin of Homo erectus who spread everywhere, different populations in different places. In Europe, that became Neanderthals, Asians, Peking man, Java man, the Australians, things like that. There was gene flow, and eventually modern humans in all these different places connected with gene flow resulted in what we call modern humans. But one of the central things that it really points to is that there was extensive gene flow among these ancient archaic groups and more modern groups, and it made all of these different groups one species. And it's questionable. But then with DNA, another hypothesis showed up, because suddenly we were looking at sequencing modern humans and Denisovans and Neanderthals, and the modern humans from Eurasia have about 2 to 4% shared DNA with Neanderthals. Denisovans have about 3 to 6% with Australians and New Guineans and things like that, and about 2% with East Asians. And so it looks like there was at least limited interbreeding. So let's start out with the modern human lineage. $500,000 years ago, we shared our most recent common ancestor with Neanderthals and Denisovans, and there was also Erectus that was still in here. Okay, and then there was interbreeding between Denisovans and Melanesians and Asians. And then Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Europeans and Asians. And then also it's found now that even Africans had some Neanderthal DNA in them recently. Okay. So these are different hypotheses about the origin of modern humans. Okay. So these are the three hypotheses. You've got multi-regional. Okay. Out of Africa. And admixture. Okay. Now, remember when we're hypothesis testing, we make predictions, and then we get data and we find out if those predictions are met. So it suggests that the oldest anatomically modern human fossils would be found in Africa. Okay? Okay. So here and here. And for the multi-regional, that there wouldn't be any central location where you'd find anatomically modern human fossils that were not, let's say, Neanderthal or Denisovan or something else. Location of ancestral alleles. So the longer a population has been in a certain location and a certain time frame, the more mutations accumulate and the more different alleles you have, and the oldest alleles from the population will not be found in any necessarily in newer populations. Okay? So, location of ancestral alleles in the phylogeny, we would again expect in Africa, and that's with modern Africans today. There's more genetic variety and variation in Africa than all the other human populations combined. Okay? You wouldn't expect any consistent pattern for multi-regional. Divergence time of African versus non-African populations. Greater than one, probably a couple million years. This is not so recent now. It looks more like about modern humans 300,000. Okay. Genetic diversity, which should be equal in all three regions. Should be much greater in Africa. And then finally, gene flow. Remember, the whole multi-regional thing suggests lots and lots of gene flow. Out of Africa, no. Admixture, yes. Okay. So, looking at this data, we can see that the admixture hypothesis has much more, it turns out, much more support now than the other ones. And even though the multi-regional for a long time was really fallen out of favor, that showed it was actually kind of on the right track in some senses, in that there was more gene flow going on that had been considered. Okay, so you can actually see these are different haplotypes, different colors, and the greatest diversity of genetic variation is always found in Africa, where it's thought that all modern humans and ancient human lineages originated. Okay? And then as Homo erectus, or modern humans, actually left Africa, they lost, first of all, this whole time Africa was generating mutations all the way along. These new populations were created or colonized much later and didn't have as much time, and alleles were lost from genetic drift. And so the further away you get from Africa, the less genetic diversity you see. Okay, Africa Homo. So we've got all these different kinds of homos, from the oldest anatomically modern humans are from Morocco, about 300,000 years ago. Heidelbergensis from here, perhaps here, South Africa. Naledi, and then Oh, actually. Oh, and then this is another one that's blue, very old. Okay. So you have all these different African populations of various ages, some of which are actually definitely of modern humans, from Morocco as well as Ethiopia. 200,000 years, 160. Recently, there was some evidence, fossil evidence from the Middle East. It's about 270 million years ago. Okay. The earliest fossils from anatomically modern humans are from actually 300,000 years ago. And then also in the Levant and the Middle East from about 130,000 years ago, and actually later than that, earlier than that. Australians all the way back to perhaps 65,000 years ago, not 50. Europe wasn't colonized with modern humans until about 40,000 years ago, but remember, Neanderthals were already there for a long time. Okay. And then we can see that we had gene flow, in other words, interbreeding between Neanderthals and humans, and admixture. So it looks like two waves of Denisovan admixture in both East Asians and then Australians, and then admixture between Europeans and Asians and Neanderthals. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. So it looks like there was until about, there might have been a number of waves of more similar anatomically modern humans before 70,000 years ago, and there's evidence of that in the DNA, but it looks like there was a great migration out of Africa 70,000 years ago, first into the Middle East, or 100,000 years ago, and then throughout Asia and all the way to Australia. And then using DNA, it looks very much like we have a common ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis, that gave rise to Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and this other branch of Homo sapiens. So these are different branches of Homo sapiens, including, it looks like the oldest human branch still in existence, which is the Khoisan, in East Africa and South Africa. Okay. Now, one thing that's interesting, though, is that, so there was interbreeding going on. Does that mean that, according to the biological species concept, that Neanderthals, Denisovans, and humans were all one species? Well, here's the deal, though. If you look at the human genome and you sample it from all over the world, there's about 40% of the whole Neanderthal genome actually in modern humans today. Only maybe 2 or 3% in each individual at the most, but literally 40% of the whole Neanderthal genome has been from matings have intergressed. Okay, and the same kind of thing with Denisovans. Okay, so that's interesting. But there's one area of the human genome that has no Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA in it at all. And that turns out to be the X chromosome. The X chromosome looks like there's been strong selection to remove any sort of Neanderthal DNA or Denisovan DNA, leaving only modern human DNA there. And a lot of the X chromosome is associated with sex. Obviously, what gender you are, but a whole like sperm motility, all kinds of different features and traits. And so it looks like, in fact, that there's a good idea that there was hybrid male inviability or sterility, at least, in terms of hybrids between Neanderthals and modern humans, or modern humans are Denisovans. Okay? So, because of that one thing, any males that would have been produced selection would have wiped them out because of genetic incompatibilities in the X chromosome. Remember, also, modern males are X, Y, females are XX. So even if females had, let's say, a bad X, they still had a good X. Okay, so it was this whole thing that we've seen before. Okay. So, like I said, it looks like the admixture hypothesis has most support, and it's pretty interesting. Oh, and then in terms of the Americas, the oldest fossils in the Americas are maybe 20,000 years old. The thing is, this was during the height of the last glaciation, and there was a big ice wall, so that any people from Siberia and East Asia that came over the land bridge would have been blocked. But there's a lot more evidence now that some of those individuals actually had watercraft, and they actually didn't go overland. They actually went down and started colonizing North America and South America. And there are some very, very old sites, even in South America, that are, 15,000 years old. So you see these different migration patterns. So there were two groups that colonized ancestors of North America, and then one of those groups led to all the groups that somehow made it down to South America. And then there's a really strange thing going on in South America with an individual with evidence of DNA from Australians, but we don't know how that happened.